Hey, welcome. I want to welcome whoever is out there and whoever may find this in the future to our first Earthwalk Ways broadcast um, here on YouTube, direct live, etc. So, my name is Darlene Rollins, and I'm launching my bi-monthly podcast Earthwalk Ways here now, direct from YouTube. You can find previous audio shows on Spreaker.com. So I want you to bear with me a little as I, probably will improve the production quality as we go. But we need to get started, and this is how I kind of launch, is just to give it a try. So my name is Darlene Rollins, and this will be a podcast that's covering everything of what I call Earthwalk Ways. And that is, how do we walk in balance and meet the experiences that shape us so that we can, really receive their wisdom. And we're basically here, I believe, on a quest for wisdom. And so life is the path. It's a soul journey path. And so as we allow ourselves to journey on that, walk, that earth walk, that incarnational earth walk, that we can really learn to connect with the things that help us stay in balance, right? And so how do we meet the experiences that do shape us? So the soul journey is vast and deep. And I believe that its quest is experience, and its path is this lifetime that we have on this planet, known as the Earthwalk, right? So I've been on my Earthwalk now, this time around anyway, for 73 years. And I'm not at all close to retiring. But as a master builder, I feel like I'm sort of just beginning to bring forth what I have discovered about how to walk in balance on this immense journey. And I think I have found some ways of dancing with the forces of life that may be helpful for others. And eventually I would like to bring on guests and create community here on this channel. So I hope you bear with me as I, add things over time and learn as we go. So I created Earthwalk Ways in 1988. Originally just as a blog and an invitation for people to, explore the healing and the meaning in their lives. And I was offering also individual sessions. And then in 1992, I was guided to this little oasis of heaven in the midst of the DC metropolitan area. And so I found these 3 acres on a bold stream bordering Nature Conservancy land all the way up and down the Rappahannock River. And it was exactly the quest of my life in some ways, to find something like this. And so I really had felt, and this was back in my 40s, it was 1992, and I really did feel like, I had sort of arrived and was able to begin to establish this little nature sanctuary and retreat. And this has been a good part of my mission in this lifetime. So in the beginning, I had done a lot of inner work on myself, and it's largely because I'd gotten quite lost as a child. And it was through the discovery of the path work in 1984. And that's where I began to find more answers than questions, answers to life's questions and ways of healing that began to inform and transform me. And so I wanted to understand, why we're here and what is the purpose of life. And I wanted to know if our actions would judge us and how to be more loving. And as a lifelong seeker, I was, reading Freud and Joseph Campbell when I was 13 years old. And, by the time I was 17, I was in therapy with bulimia and clinical depression. And the healing was going to take a while. So it wasn't until I found the path work in 1984 that I felt like I had begun to, find the places that I needed to be. And all along, of course, the journey was that way. Um, but it's interesting how there's a kind of, preparation, divine timing. When the student is ready, the master appears, that kind of understanding in this larger soul journey uh, metaphor, or, understanding of what we are about here. And so when I, was in college, I remember actually my therapist, said, what you need is a spiritual path. Your questions are not the questions of, sort of the ego trying to find its way in life. So I felt like, for a long time, I was on this deep quest, and I was looking for a spiritual path that could not only, guide me to the ultimate goal, but sort of help me walk on the path day by day through the underworld, and doing the shadow work. And so I had discovered the path work in, like I said, 1984, and that proved to be, exactly what I was seeking. So, in my history, I realized, that there's sometimes a long wait, but then usually what you need, what your mission is, what you're longing for, what you came here to do, will begin to emerge, will begin to, ground itself here on earth. And I think it's also, as we do the healing work. So when I understand the soul journey, it's kind of like there's two levels of mission. We bring in certain difficulties, we bring in certain limitations, confusions, negativities, and uh, maybe, they came to us through getting lost in another lifetime or something like that. But for whatever cause they have, we have chosen. I mean, they could even be ancestral or someone else that we care about, and we bring it in, right, with this holy mission of carrying this depth and darkness and difficulty, for the purpose of transforming it. And we really are the light that can transform it, and we're never given more than we actually um, can carry, according to this little contemporary path called the pathwork. And we'll get into more of exactly what that is in a little bit here. But anyway, this path, it didn't deny our human feelings and challenges. In fact, it, really asked us to face and embrace them. And it didn't mean collude with them necessarily or anything like that, but just to really know ourselves deeply. It was a path of self-knowledge and self acceptance, because you really can't see yourself without accepting. Otherwise you'll blind yourself, and you can't face it. So there was a self-acceptance, and then also the self-responsibility, which isn't meaning that you should control anything, or that, you know, you're supposed to be blamed for anything. It just means that, we have this responsibility always to, given whatever is here, created by us or someone else, like to go deep into the heart, to make this connection that will help us understand, the depth of the true response that's needed, so that we're not responding just from our woundedness, not just from our, assumptions and judgments and that kind of thing. And of course, as we go, we clear a lot of that, but there's always more. And I think partly this journey is a lifetime journey, right? And again, in our Western culture, we don't look at things that way. Everything is on the fast track. And so part of the difficulty that we have is really having the long enough view to understand life. And in the beginning, you really can't. I mean, nobody does, I don't believe. When you're young, you see from that viewpoint. But truly, it is something that we, I think, are learning to journey in this direction, right? Of taking this responsibility, understanding that what is unfolding before us is really like a school. And instead of running with it or fighting with it, it's like if we can just be with it and be curious and be open and, seek to uh, have compassion for ourselves and others, because this is an immense school and it's a scary school and it's sometimes a very painful school. And we go through a great deal. And so there's this way that I believe uh, it's from a different perspective that we can begin to find our way through in a little better way. And so, again, this is a path that I found that created community, and that wasn't in the superficial halls of a few hours on Sunday, right? But a deeply committed group of people who were willing to risk sharing and revealing themselves over time for the purpose of setting free the love that we are. And so I learned true connection and intimacy in this ongoing work. And I learned to feel and heal, understand and accept myself without comparison, envy, jealousy, or pride. So we are all equal and we are all unique in this once in a lifetime opportunity to experience certain aspects of who you are. And you're more than, this personality, this lifetime. But it's part of how we can look more closely. When we're all of everything, it's difficult. And so this is kind of like the microscope that we focus in. We focus in on certain aspects of life in general, and we experience it directly by embodying it in some way. And so there's this, one story that says, we came in and we had a lot of trauma, which is true. But it kind of leaves the thing, stuck there, right? And there's not really a problem if we understand that the trauma was part of the path and was part of what set up the conditions that were part of our curricula. And, it's true that there was, a lot of hurt in those circumstances and may still be held in our bodies in that piece, but that's a part of what we came here to do. It's a hurt that maybe even goes, it's collective hurt. It goes beyond this lifetime. And so each one of us who can, like actually be with that hurt in this form of open, curious, compassionate presencing, and allowing the feelings to move, allowing the truth to be known deep within us, of who we are, of what we really want, right? And without, again, blame, judgment, comparison, the duality that we seem to get trapped in from the ego perspective. And so to me, this is like a life-giving story. We're here for a purpose. Even the pain and the difficulty and the suffering has purpose. We're not really meant to suffer, but sometimes, we don't know our way out, and we can get quite tied into knots within ourselves that, do cause suffering. But ultimately, if we didn't suffer, it's like the guidance, part of our guidance system, right? If it didn't hurt, we wouldn't want to resolve it. We wouldn't want to try to find a better way. And so I think, whenever we run into our oftentimes patterns of suffering or hurting, or, like, because there's a kind of dynamics that we're blocked into, that those situations actually do bring forth the very work that we came here to do. And so the ego looks at this and says, oh, something's wrong, it's something to be ashamed of, it's something to fix, or, and it's true, we want to, transform it. But there's a kind of different approach towards it, which from the ego sort of thinks that it's something bad, something wrong. And this kind of shaming that we carry in our beings, I think, is not so useful for us. So anyway, it's interesting. I wasn't expecting to go in this direction, and I realized that I just was sort of following some other internal cue. I hope people can follow me, but oftentimes that's what will happen, is I will have a outline or a plan of on what to say, and then something else comes in, usually a little more in depth, but I think you get the idea, right? That, this is uh, a path that gives us this kind of life-giving story of what everything is about. And when we don't have that, when we have the ego story, that is kind of about winning and losing and who's on top and who's on the bottom, um, it's kind of like it's a very painful uh, and limiting lens, because very few people are on the top, which means that mostly we are feeling less than, right? Which is not the truth of God, not the truth of spirit. Each one of us has our own unique value, and that value doesn't really come from so much, what we've done or accomplished. It does come from, our very nature, as divine beings, as children of the creation that, is a divine creation. And so, and a divine purpose. We're an amazing uh, species, and there's something that is being born within us even now that is radically new and different. So I think it's really an interesting time to be on the earth and to try to follow this deeper journey, this descent journey, this soul path, so that we can, allow ourselves to, like, really find our deepest fulfillment, right? Live our highest purpose and our greatest life. And that's not, that we should be trying to figure it out and fix it and do it from our generally overactive ego, but that we can trust that life is going to help with its process of unseen shaping, and that we can meet what we're experiencing moment to moment in a way that, really edifies us and makes life, uh, beyond the beautiful mystery that it already is, this amazing guide and teacher. And, you see the brilliance uh, and the wisdom in everything. So, right now we're here, I think I mentioned, with this beautiful land and a sanctuary, and I have my own retreat. And I've done a lot of inner work, that uh, kind of culminated in some ways with this path work. And yet I continue to do more and seek more and learn more and integrate more as we go. And so by now I feel like I do have sort of my own ways of working, and I'm really aware that everybody needs a different way of working, that what works for some people, it's really not right for others. So, part of why I want to, just share my understandings and, some of who I am out here in the community, to see if, some of you do feel a connection to how I'm understanding things, because that might be a way to know that it might be a good match to do some work with me. And there's many ways. I'll get into it at the end, of how you can do that. So, basically in the pathwork programs, we did learn a kind of deep intimacy and a kind of willingness to risk exposure, to be willing to feel our shame without merging and believing that the shame was somehow really about us or true, but understanding that it was just a feeling. And as we, faced into and moved through all of this, I began really to learn to feel and heal and understand and accept myself without comparisons or envy or jealousy or pride. And, as I was saying, we're all equal and we're all unique. And this life is this one time opportunity. So, the interesting thing about life is that it really is like a mirror. And so it's this experience of seeing ourselves projected onto this mirror and then reflected back to us. And that really does help us see ourselves in ways that, it's hard to do otherwise. And, in doing that, though, we have to awaken the compassion and, find the way that we can, really find the sovereignty within each one of us to hold whatever programs, we've been misprogrammed with, and all of our adaptations to that, our defenses, our ways of isolating, our ways of, being hostile and negative, our ways of being even lovey and masky and really sweet, but it's insincere. So there's all of us are caught in some way in the matrix. um, and so that's a part of what these paths are helping us do. And it's not just the path work, and there's much of my path work also borrows from other paths. I particularly like inner relationship focusing as a great tool. And there are many other tools that we use. A lot of working with nature, both in, simple forest bathing processes, or, doing deep dives, opening to more shamanic realms within nature. So we're, really wanting to expand our understanding of who we are, and a lot of, stepping outside of our roles, our limitations, all of the, sort of binary definitions that the world has of things. We're beginning to realize our, um, no, there's a rainbow spectrum. It's all different shades. And so the sad thing is that our dominant culture, is kind of lost on this. And in most ways, we've lost also what we knew about how to live in harmony with ourselves and with the earth. And we used to live in communally on the land. And at that time, then we were very intimate with the land, and then also with each other. And for many of this, and this was many generations ago, right? So it's been really lost in time. And since that time, and for most of human civilization, we became very good at basically engineering nature, so that, we could kind of conform her to our needs. And we also enslaved each other in various ways. So the current dynamic on Earth really is conflictual, competitive, and destructive. And yet, that is not the normal or natural way. It is not the ultimate way that we came here to find, and we came here to bring in many ways. So the evolution of consciousness comes through each person. And so the more that each one of us can also do our individual work, the more that we are doing the work for, you know, the earth and all of humanity. So now we need more than just, greener politic and greener lifestyles, etc. And, basically we lost kinship with each other. We lost kinship with the earth. And so now, you know, we're, I've waited many years, as we try to tweak and try to make gradual improvements, but it doesn't seem to be able to happen. And the issue is deeper than politics. Um, it's kind of like it goes to the very heart of the perception of ourselves and the world. So we perceive the world, basically through our cultural lenses and our conditioning. And we also perceive the world through a fairly utilitarian lens, through the analytical mind that breaks stuff down and, wants to make predictions, wants to control things, right? This is our dominant modality in the Western world. But what about the deeper registers of the heart, right? There's much, much more to us. And we've gotten identified only with our mind, our intellect, our rational, our reasoning facilities. And we've also kind of run from the heart in a way, because that's carries this problematic place of feeling, right? The heart is where we feel joy, but the heart is also where we feel fear, or we can close the heart in fear, and also where we feel sadness. So there's a way that there's two forces that kind of bring us into the head and out of the heart. And so it's a big reprogramming process that we have to do, but the results are very important for us, because the head alone cannot manage and find its way through what's happening now. we, we can even use AI, and create AI, and I think it's still not going to quite be what we thought. And the promise is that within us, we do have this capacity, but we have to learn how to access it. And so there's a journey that we are kind of in an evolutionary process to expand our own faculties, our own abilities to perceive. And then I think our own deeper computer, the deep mind of the universe, will be in touch with us, and we will know fairly instantly what we need to know. But we need to learn how to ask, and how to access all of this. So we're trying to kind of pass through this eye of the needle place in our cultural evolution. And we're trying to reclaim some of the ancient knowledge and understanding and capacities that mankind has had throughout, the many hundreds of thousands of years that we've evolved here, and tried different experiments. And, all of them, I think, were mixed bags. I don't know, maybe there was a Shambhala somewhere. But I think each one of them also, we were learning, and we were honing, and we were, connecting with things way deeper than, our Western civilization and its current scientific mode fully comprehends. So we have the heart. And the heart generates basically the largest magnetic field in the body. And in fact, the heart is really an organ of perception. We have all of these senses, right? I think there's way more than we usually think of in the five senses, touch, taste, sight, sound, smell, right? There's also even like a sense of thirst or hunger, a sense of wanderlust, right? So there's many different flavors of this. And then we also have the sensory organ of this heart, and it reads the electromagnetic information that's available. But we have kind of atrophied the capacity to tune into not just the heart, but in general our sensory. So this is one of the powerful things about working with things like forest bathing and, ancient ritual and being out in nature and, doing things together, is that it really does awaken again sort of our ability to presence this here and now moment in this, complex field of the natural realm, which has much more than what the mind understands and, is aware of. And that's where the heart comes in, because we can perceive this much more, when we're attuned to and know how to listen to the heart as well. And the best thing that can help us learn how to listen to the heart is to listen to our senses, to pay attention when you go into the forest, to close your eyes and listen, to feel the textures, to have the breeze, awareness of the breeze on your skin, and to the light, passing across the shadows, of the leaves of the trees and that kind of thing. So nature is a sensory feast. And the more that we can kind of go into that and just practice losing our mind and coming to our senses, the more that we will be able to be more fulfilled in life, because while not feeling anything maybe blocks some of the pain, it also blocks a lot of the pleasure, right? So as we begin to feel more, it feeds us. It's something that our soul has been hungry for. It's part of our distracted and, sort of addicted culture, is that we're not really being fed anything substantial through the senses. And so as we open and deepen in the senses, that will also help us connect more deeply to the heart chakra and this electromagnetic field, and begin to register, perception, meaning. The heart is an organ of meaning. And so it becomes like a superpower or an organ of high sense perception when we learn that we can recover the awareness of its information. And Tolle says it this way. I kind of like, this little quote of his. It's not exact, but he says basically, when we perceive nature through the mind, we're only seeing the utilitarian purposes: board feet of lumber, a research project, a mountain to climb, or mine. And when we perceive through the heart, when we join nature in that present sensory moment of now, we basically open to a whole other state of awareness within us. And actually, from this state, we feel deeply, and we know within this depth of feeling, we actually know in ways that we hadn't. It's, sometimes referred to as intuition, but I think that limits our understanding of this as well, this knowing of the heart. And so, we feel deeply, we know within this depth of feeling. And it also allows us to be able to stop and smell the roses. And so life simply becomes fulfilling as it is. There's so much richness, so much beauty, so much love. And we feel all of this coming to us, through our senses, as treasures, as gifts, as blessings. And so we begin to feel more blessed. So the mind says, how can we do that when we have all these problems and futures to control, right? So we don't trust life. And from there, we have to control everything. And that is exhausting. And it seems true that life cannot be trusted on its own, because all kinds of terrible things can happen or already have. So what has to change into, what is basically, the things that are the way they are, that are threatening, like we feel like we have to control and change that into what we want. And actually, what is truly will change into the next and the next and the next. So like what is always changing. So it's like the active current doesn't have to get involved. We don't have to make it change. We don't have to do anything. If we just acknowledge and be with it as it is, that gives it the space. That gives it the acceptance and allowing and the movement to change. So, what is going to change into the next thing and into the next. And that is really what being a human being is. And we are agents of change. We are agents of change in a changing world. And if we allow the movement and learn to rest in being, even just a moment longer than we're tolerating at this moment, like even knowing that that's a thing to do, right? Because often we've never even had anyone help us pause and find that resting place. So, if we can do that, being open and trust, then the moment will take us where we want to go. It's kind of an interesting process, and it takes it's kind of like you've got a helper or something aligned with you, and like everything that we are trying to do that controls it is much harder and much less satisfying than the way that it's actually trying to happen for us. So if we can be open and trust a little bit, then a lot of times we can just follow the flow, and the flow of life will take us there. We've set it in motion with our longing, with our desires, with our understanding, our prayers of what we want. And then, like, we need to relax and trust into that. And our inner prayers and desires, they're answered by universal wisdom, but sometimes they take time, and something else has to emerge for them to actually come to fruition. So again, the time frame of the ego and the time frame of the soul are quite different. And it helps us to know that, because then we can kind of stand beside the anxious parts of us that, the guide says, like we could all relax and trust in everything, if we knew it was all certain, if we knew what we wanted was going to come for sure, but when we don't know that, it's hard to have patience, because we want the confirmation, and the anxiety comes because, we don't know if we're going to get there or not. So if we really knew we were going to arrive, then we could relax and enjoy the ride, right? And I think that's really what we're trying to, learn to do a little more, is trust the ride. And of course, I came in with lots and lots of anxieties and fears, and still have many of them. But the one thing that I can use now in the face of all of those is to know how many times, I've, faced the cliff or jumped off the cliff, and it's all been not only okay, but, it's all been what has led me deeper and further and given me more joy and more capacity and everything that I've wanted in life. So there is this way that life wants to partner with us. And, we've been programmed in many ways to distrust life. And it seems pretty somehow self-obvious that we shouldn't, but that's something to look at a little deeper. And that's where the path work takes us to, like how do we, is there anything that we're doing that keeps us spinning in the cycles of pain, or encountering the same old, rejection or heartbreak or whatever, time and time and again in our lifetimes. And there are these dynamics that get set up in our programming. So, it's not your imagination, but once again, there are deeper answers. And many of the spiritual paths, but particularly for me, the path work seems like, has a lot of the answers I was seeking. We need to look a little and have a deeper understanding, look further. So we learn to relax our tense, futile attempts and cool our frustrations, stemming from these unmet hopes or demands, based really on our fears of life, right? This is the hardest part of the journey, because fears are very convincing. They convince us we have to control life or die. And no wonder we fight so hard. No wonder it's so hard to relax and just see what will happen. Otherwise, we're projecting those fears onto our experience. So to transform them, we have to go into and out the other side. We can never challenge or heal the fears by avoiding or trying to control them, and it will never work or create the life that we long for. So part of the journey is that we are here really to face, to be with, to experience what we're most afraid of. And, like, you may look at that, like, what have you already gone through, and how has that maybe helped you lose some fear over some deep places of fear in your being. Whether we fail or win in our attempts to, control, we merge with sort of this as our identity. I'm good when I win, bad when I lose. We live in a kind of painful box of inflation or deflation, which often kind of gives us whiplash. We don't really understand, and what we identify with is the transitory aspects of ourselves. So when we say, who am I? We try to figure it out, but we're a whole bunch of conflicting and, different aspects, right? You can't really find that deeper level, I mean, we can say, yeah, I'm a lot of everything, you know, I'm a winner and a loser. I am good and bad. Like, that's good. But yet, there's something about also, uh, looking at the way that we have attached to these values and this kind of competitive model and this, way of thinking, again, the way of trying to master life. Right? So there's an ego way of mastering life, and then there's the soul way of mastering life. And in the soul's journey, which is only one of many that we usually undertake, because we are eternal, then we are creators of our experience in many, many ways, including that we magnetize things to us consciously and unconsciously. Um, the soul has a different agenda than the personality. So, the personality doesn't realize that by what it's resisting, it's actually magnetizing, right? There's an old saying, what you resist persists. And so, well, what is the opposite of resistance? Like, I mean, it's a deep study. There's this way that we merge or we resist ourselves, what is, different things like that. And there's another way to meet it all, which I think is really helpful, where we don't identify with any of it, but that we begin to activate and awaken our own inner center and our own higher self. And then that part can, um, really observe and be with all of the other different parts. And that part is what can help us integrate. So, the personality wants safety and comfort. The soul has a whole different agenda than the personality. The soul wants evolution and growth. And that growth is not about winning so much as about learning and expanding in our capacity to be resilient and happy. So when I first understood that our culture didn't offer much in the way of deeper guidance, but was only about winning versus losing, and it doesn't give us ways of interpreting our experience that really create resilient, life-giving stories or understandings about what we're doing here on Earth, I turned to searching everywhere in my own journey. And so, one of those was kind of Native American understandings. And I love this, traditional, Native Americans are known for their storytellers, right? And this is an honored position of oral histories and stories that helped people, be educated in how to live in balance and harmony on the earth. And the stories they understood were very, very powerful. And so I like this saying that says, because we're all creating stories, each one of us, everything that happens to us, we're making up a story about it, right? And so it's really important, as they say, to choose your stories wisely. For in the telling, they begin to happen. And this is all about interpretation. Like the event happened, it was what it was, the experience was what it was. And then the mind, the Native Americans, again, they say, human beings are determining beings. And in that way, we have to, interpret, we have to determine, what things are and what our place is on the wheel. And they say that is by knowing what we have to give away one to another. But then, we have to tell the story of that in some way. And so oftentimes our stories are not life-giving stories. They're stories that, when we hear them spoken inside of us, our heart sinks. We feel helpless and hopeless and bad. So whenever you feel that, no, it's not you. The problem is your story. You got a bad interpretation. The way that you're spinning the experience is through a certain lens. And I bet you that lens is not ultimately a good lens or a real lens or a true lens. It may have some aspects that can be acknowledged, right? And certainly there's a part of you that we can acknowledge that experiences it that way. But it's not ultimately, we don't know if what the reality is. And so it's best if we can kind of just step back and let go of interpretations until like that interpretation sort of imposes itself on us from the experience. And that could be probably misled to just because we have these dynamics that we keep recreating, and then we have a story about that, and it seems very true, that somehow we must be doing it wrong because we keep you know getting the same results that we're trying to avoid. So there's a lot of different levels of this, but when we are noticing our stories, that also helps us be in a little more of a observation place rather than merging. Like when we have ourselves all in reaction, usually we've merged, and we've merged with a particular story that causes us pain. So anyway, you can play with some of this, I hope, and maybe find it useful. I'm kind of doing a fairly broad overview here, but there's many, many things in this big experience of life. So when I was, trying to find more of my own understanding and my own path, um, it was difficult. When I grew up, it was about the time that all of the Eastern paths were coming into the United States, and I, didn't find them so easily accessible for myself. I had really severe ADHD, and so that was another sort of perfection in finding the path work, right? And that is, let me give a little time to go into this a little more now. The path work is this contemporary path. It was actually channeled material that came from a trained medium by the name of Eva Paracas. And she began channeling what became known as the Pathwork Lectures in 1957, and she passed away in 1978. And there's like 258 lectures and some additional materials that she left us. And it kind of outlined, not in some rational linear way, but in a kind of uh, almost, what is it, fractal way, where you've got, levels and levels of the same understandings and geometries emerging um, from these lectures. This great wisdom. And then many people have studied them and found ways of trying to help people, live them in a way, because it's something that, you can look at again through the mind and probably get some useful information. But where it's really useful is when you work it from the heart and you work it in community, and you really do your own inner exploration within the context of somebody else holding you and challenging you and witnessing you, et cetera, as well as doing it in groups, which is another very profound and healing way that uh, this work helps. So again, it's a kind of, like I mentioned, the Eastern approaches that were coming in early on. So it wasn't until I was 34 that I found this. And it clearly was not an Eastern approach. It was really more of a contemporary path of initiation and descent, which I would see falling more as a Western shamanic approach, which again sees life as the spiritual journey and not as something just to be transcended, but to be accepted and embraced, and wisdom, which was learned both in action, but was also learned in just sitting with what was, and listening deeply to one's inner feelings, the truth of nature, being present to the love that we had for our children, all of these things, stopping and smelling the roses, being here now. So wisdom seemed to, ultimately from in our culture, often, our culture has more like of this heroic mythology, this action hero uh, basis. And so wisdom can be learned in action, but it's also like wisdom has two parts. It has an active part and a receptive or being part, a listening part, a paying attention part. So what we want to explore is, how to blend them, maybe. It's beautiful to stress the heroic, active, triumphal state, but that's also kind of this duality of winning, right? And we really can't arrive to the full balance of that without the feminine side of this path. And the Pathwork Lectures has a beautiful lecture on the masculine and feminine principles as the foundation of all creation, right? So that, our culture is like way, way overbalanced in this kind of masculine way. And it's a part of why the creations that is, coming from it are not actually as full and complete and helpful as they might be. So, in the deep listening, soul whispering, and natural communion that I like to offer, that has to be, kind of the ground and the foundation of this path, both of descent and then of the heroic, return. So, there is this path of acceptance, integration, and love. And it is the harmonious blend of the active and receptive states that will really lead us to balance and wholeness. So I want to share a writing about the feminine journey a little bit here, because many of us are more familiar with this masculine hero's journey, and it's very much an aspect of our culture. But the feminine's journey is less familiar, although I think you may recognize this as I read it. So let me offer this, and then we'll begin to go to our closer here. So this was written by Layla Island and was posted in Midwives of the Soul. And it's entitled The Feminine Journey versus the Hero's Journey. And she writes, the hero's journey can often be described as the masculine path of transformation, adventure, slaying of dragons, a battle between good and evil, is ultimately the purpose, to be united with the feminine within us, for men and women alike, this quest. The feminine's journey looks quite different. The yin aspect of the path is not a call to adventure. It is a call to surrender, a call to quiet and stillness, receptivity and patience. While the masculine braves a treacherous world, the feminine weaves herself a cocoon. Where the masculine seeks to achieve a goal, the feminine waits in uncertainty. She waits in darkness, not knowing, not doing, just being and enduring suffering that is sometimes so great and never ending, it seems unendurable. But it is here in this cocoon that the feminine will ultimately be reunited with the lost masculine. To be clear, the feminine is not doing nothing in her not doing, nor is she a victim of her suffering. There is much going on, but it is invisible to the eye. She is active in her passivity, strong in her surrender, and she must strike the miraculous balance of being with her suffering without seeking to control the outcome, but also without completely giving up. We don't want to submit. So feel the razor's edge of this walk. She is pinned to a cross in which there is no solution. Her task is to bear the heavy tension and submit to the eternal injustice that befell her. until hopefully, maybe one day, grace comes from deep within and all around, and the cross is reconciled. But day after day she waits, often hidden away, usually in solitude. How long can this possibly last? It could be years. There is no end in sight, and the possibility that it will never end is part of what brings her to her knees. She realizes finally she is not in charge here. She cannot incubate this egg of potential on her own. She must hand it over to the Great Mother. It is she who holds our fate in her hands. It is she who we must entrust our lives to. It is she who teaches us just how much control we do not have and how much we truly do. And unlike the epic battles of the hero's journey, the feminine's task in myths and fairy tales are tedious, time-consuming, take commitment, seem trivial, and require the help of animals and magic. There are no dragons to slay, but rather beans to sort, stinging nettle to weave, straw to spin into gold. She is not sure anything will come of all of this, but neither is she sure nothing will. She only knows she doesn't know, and she must do her part. She must keep following the breadcrumbs on the inner path of her psyche. This slow, unexciting path goes against every aspect of our culture. The hero's journey, while treacherous and not for the faint of heart, is worshipped as the myth of our time. This is not the case for the feminine way. It does not make for $1 million blockbusters, best-selling novels. It opposes our busy, fast-paced society. And to the immature masculine, both in the culture and in the person themselves, it can appear as if the one on the feminine journey is doing nothing and wasting her time. These voices will constantly exclaim, "You need to do more. You need to solve this now. You must stop feeling that. Nothing is happening. You're being lazy. Hurry up." But if we listen to these voices, we will either refuse the call or find ourselves stuck along the way, unable to surrender and unable to move forward. Our suffering will then grow exponentially, and our bodies will protest, and our lives may become possible or perhaps even barren. Or we may have begun the journey already, but wish to rush to the end, where we could break the incubating egg and kill a potential. One of the keys on this path is to teach the masculine within to be a comforting and illuminating companion of the darkness rather than an obstacle. When he learns to honor and help the way of the feminine, the resistance melts, the way unfolds, and the union draws nearer. And then one day, a day we never knew would come, the cocoon begins to hatch. Just enough to feel a ray of sunlight on our face, just enough to breathe in the fresh air and hear the new life calling. While the hero's journey ends in surrender, like yin springing from yang and finding the passive in the active. The feminine journey ends in action. Yang springs from yin, the active from the passive. And as the cocoon opens, so too does the world. While returning may not be easy and our lives still not perfectly sorted, we will make our way with the strength of the matured masculine by our side and the feminine herself transformed. So I think most of us kind of recognize these two paths and know the way that we kind of fight against and struggle within that feminine journey. So it is I hope, a useful thing to call it forth and honor it and recognize it and know that, we are all each in many ways also, you know, walking that way. And that's okay, which is, the most important part. And it's difficult. And we need to honor that. We need to be for ourselves and hold ourselves in the depths of this journey. Life is immense. And then when we turn against ourselves, as others have turned against us, and we, see ourselves in the mirror of their judgments, it can be, also very, very painful and fundamentally untrue, right? So it's a part of our ability to find our own inner authority. And again, oftentimes that takes this sort of descent into this deep place of the feminine's journey of surrender, of being with, of waiting, of seeming to wait interminably. And it's only, people that have a few years behind them that can even begin to understand that this is part of it. In our youth, we are more on the active side of life, but the medicine wheel takes us through many different, sides of the wheel, and many different seasons of life, and many different aspects and qualities of life, and the journey of aging from infancy into old age and death is the medicine wheel of experience. And it, weaves back and forth, in these duality ways, individuation and community, active, heroic, and feminine, receptive, surrendering journeys. So we're winding up here, and it is, this program, this new program that I'm offering, calling it Deep Listening, Soul Whispering, and Natural Communion. And it has to be the ground and foundation sort of the path of descent. And it is a path of acceptance, integration, and love. And it balances both of these sides. It's the harmonious blend of the active and receptive states that will lead us into balance and wholeness. So, this is my foundation, and I'm offering several ongoing programs and individual sessions to support people in discovering a new way of seeing themselves and, interpreting the events of their lives through a life-giving story that provides the needed life force for us to be able to pick up our work again with faith and joy. So I'm offering a residential program every other month. That will be a weekend a month, every other month, starting here in September through May. And so that would be, the deepest immersion. And it's beautiful to do this work in community. It's the most powerful and profound way that I know. But you need to have a certain level of, groundedness and maturity, and having some work under your belt to undertake that. And then there are many levels. I offer a free lecture study on Wednesday nights called The Wisdom of the Guide, Wisdom of the Pathwork lectures. And so we just read a lecture and discuss. It's a great, way to sort of absorb this material. Many people have interesting comments or questions about it as well. And I can bring in sort of my larger understanding of the work, to make some commentary that I think help people understand the material a little better. And so I also have, other programs that are here and online. So I want to just encourage you to go to Earthwalk Ways events to learn more. I'm getting a new website done, and it's almost complete. But the events page is, where I post most of the ongoing events, and you can actually also follow me there if you want. So I hope that this has been somewhat enlightening, and I'm hoping to offer another program again in 2 weeks at this noontime on Wednesday. So let's see if we can, build a little community here. And so I would enjoy for people to, you know, come onto the chat, and also, um, you know, email me or connect with me to see, if you have some way that you might want to also be interviewed, or have a dialogue that you would like us to get into, or something like that. So I enjoy very much offering these thoughts to you. I hope they are of use, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks.